Hey guys, so today we will be setting up Ubuntu Server. So first of all, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to download Ubuntu Server 22.04. That's the latest LTS version, long-term support version. This will guarantee OS security by 2027. This is the first link in the description. It's going to be the first link in the description. You'll want to click the really big green button. Download Ubuntu Server. When you click this, it's going to download, right? And you'll want to save it to your ISOs folder, right? And I'll save it in a custom folder. Right? And I'm gonna click save, and then it'll download. Now, I'll show you right now how we can just set it up in VMware Workstation. And continue. So, we're going to select custom. We're going to select, you could do typical, but I like to do custom. Select the latest or the version that fits your version. And then we're going to be installing the operating system later. We're going to be selecting Linux and then setting Ubuntu 64-bit. Okay, now we're going to be doing Ubuntu Server, or for whatever name that you desire can be in here. Location can be in your documents folder. However, I have a drive dedicated for virtual machines, so I'm going to use that instead. Yeah. So it's in my D drive. Alrighty, there we go. Hold on. What was this? Location, D drive and virtual machine. That's fine. That's fine. Then we're gonna set amount of cores you want. I'm gonna set 8 cores since that's enough. And I'm gonna put 4,096 megabytes. I think is quite enough. 4,096 megabytes should be quite enough for anyone inside a virtual machine. You could do 8 gigabytes, but you know. Next, we are going to use network address translation. This will use a virtual NAT adapter that VMware will create. If you decide to use bridge networking with replicating your physical connection, this will use your router, your main router, to assign its IP address. You might not have the best connectivity since it's going to be a little harder to configure. Host-only networking ensures that you and the host are isolating your network into, basically your host is isolated with the virtual machine, so that if something happens, the virtual machine and the host can only be affected. Your home network will be preserved. I'm going to use network address translation for the sake of it. However, bridge networking is a pretty cool concept, and if you'd like to do that. In real life, you wouldn't have to set this up. You're going to probably automatically be using network address translation anyway, so that would be fine. And, yes, next we're going to use the LSI logic. This is your I/O controller. There's not much difference. Although this would be mostly for SCSI controllers. However, for the next step, we're going to select a virtual disk type. I don't think I want to do SCSI. I'm going to do NVMe. You could do SATA, SCSI. IDE I wouldn't really recommend since that's pretty slow and not great for virtual machines, right? Because it's going to be pretty slow. Next, we're going to create a new virtual disk, which is an option I would recommend. However, you can also use an existing virtual disk, which basically means it has to be the same operating system or the same kind of file system, so that I can read it. Or you could use a physical disk, so you can literally make a partition dedicated to that, like a drive. That's for advanced users, and I don't really see the need for it unless you're doing something that requires real hardware. If you're really doing that, I would just purchase a separate server anyways. So I'm going to go with create a new virtual disk. Now, I'm going to set my maximum disk size to 128 gigabytes. I'm going to store the virtual disk as single file. Multiple files is harder to work with. I would rather do it as a single file. Next, this is your virtual machine kind of disk file. It ends with vmdk. This is the file name that you can choose. This is purely cosmetic, so it has no effect on performance or anything. It's just your true choice, whether you want to give it a custom name other than your virtual machine name. I want to stick with the virtual machine name as it. Now, before we finish, we're going to click Customize Hardware. We're going to click New CD/DVD SATA. We're going to use an ISO image. We are going to go ahead to, and I'm going to go ahead to my ISOs folder right here. And I am going to use Ubuntu 22.04. Right? And double check every one of your settings. See if that's what you like. Confirm. Right? Close. Finish. You'll have one more chance to double check, and then personally I'd like to do UEFI, since UEFI is, you know, a global accepted standard. So I choose it. So now we're gonna power on this virtual machine. This will take us to the installation process. So we can try or install Ubuntu Server. Or you can boot from the next volume if you have an existing disk. However, there's no point in following this tutorial if you have an existing disk and you just want to boot from that. And UEFI firmware settings is where you can change the UEFI firmware settings of your main host or of the virtual machine. I'm going to select try or install Ubuntu Server. It's going to open up the thing. It's just going to load up the drivers necessary for the installation. Alrighty, now that we're in the installation menu. So, now, we're going to select English or whatever language you prefer in this list. However, I'm going to select English since this is an English tutorial. You're going to select OK if this is what you want. This is the default English configuration. Done. You can choose either Ubuntu Server or Ubuntu Server Minimized. I would only recommend it minimized if, of the two scenarios, you don't want many services like Snap running by default, or I think Docker, and you're low on storage. And it also has a small footprint. Or you can use Ubuntu Server, which contains the main installation. You can customize it as you'd like. I would choose Ubuntu Server since it's standard. Next, we are going to configure a new we're going to configure our IP address. You can either set a static IP address, or you can make it manual, right? I'm gonna select automatic with DHCP. However, this one might not be preferable with a server. Only reason is due to it having, usually servers need a static IP address. However, DHCP can change your address, but you can make it so that it, you can set a IP bind, right, to the MAC address so that it stays the same. In real life, it's gonna use, I believe, DHCP by default, and you can configure this as well. If you want static IP address, you can select on the top here, and then click Edit IPv4 or IPv6, whichever you're using, and then select the IPv4 method. Now we are going to click Done. Proxy address, per proxy address, you can select a proxy to use for the connection to the internet inside the server. However, I wouldn't personally use this since, number one, it would slow down most things, and number two, it's not really that necessary. So I'm gonna skip this, so I'm gonna click done. So mirror address, I wouldn't change this unless you want to use another like huge repository for Ubuntu packages. This is where you'll get all your Ubuntu packages. I'm gonna click done. I would like to encrypt my disk. So I'm going to encrypt it with a strong password. This password should be very strong. You can see how long my password is. That's a pretty decent password for it. Now, next menu will show you the summary of all changes that it's going to be doing to your drive. As you can see, it's going to make a new kind of partitions on it, and it's going to encrypt the partition with Lux, and then it's going to first of all format it, and then it's going to format it as kind of ext4. And then it's going to create the boot EFI drive and everything. Boot EFI partition, sorry. And then it's going to mount it and everything. This looks all good to me, so I'm going to click done and move on to the next step. This will modify your drive, right? So you want to click continue. Now my name, I'm going to select it as administrator. Oopsies, that's my mistake. Administrator. Server name, I'm going to select this to be Quex VM CA1. I don't know. Random. Hit the username, I'm going to say administrator. Choose a password. This should be a very strong password. There we go. I'm going to install OpenSSH, since this is how we'll primarily be connecting. I don't really like this kind of menu, since number one, it's going to be hard to install VMware tools. I'm not sure if there's tools for server edition, so that's not great. And also, you can choose to import the SSH identity from a service like GitHub or Launchpad. However, I'm not going to choose to do that. We'll manually import our keys later. I'm going to click done. You can choose to install any of these on the server. However, if you are going to be installing these, I would highly recommend doing it on Docker, especially on a main system. Right? Maybe out of all of these, I would select maybe the Docker, but this is a virtual machine. With about 4 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm not gonna do it in this video, but I might show you how to install Docker and other things as a separate video. So I wouldn't choose any of these unless you're using a dedicated server for this, and you're dedicating a VM or something. Not a VM, sorry, a regular server. I'm gonna click done. Now it's going to install the kernel and everything. So at this point, you can wait, right? So this is just gonna finish installing. I'll see you guys on the other side through this time lapse. At this stage, you can choose to cancel the update and reboot, and you'll be in Ubuntu. However, it won't have been updated to the maximalist version, and you'll have to update yourself. I'd rather update in this than just canceling it and rebooting. potentially, you know, in the middle of an update, which is not great. So I'd rather let it update and then reboot. As you can see, it has finished updating, so now we can reboot. We'll want to remove the CD-ROM. It should already be removed, but we'll check. Connected to power, disabled. Click enter, and boom. It should boot up. Now we need to unlock the disk using our encryption password. I've entered the password. It should decrypt the drive. There we go. Alrighty, now that it's finished installing, here we go. So, it has finished installing. So, now we can set up our keys and everything. So, the first thing we're going to do, we saw the IP address, but if you didn't see the IP address, what you could do is you could log in and enter the password. And we're in. So now I'm going to show you how you can set up, okay, so now we want to type in IPN. This will give us our IP address. This means we should be able to connect with our password. So we will do SSH administrator 20.131, is that right? We're going to say yes. And then we're going to enter the password. You should see something familiar to this. I mean, similar to this. There we go. Now, we are going to go into this. We're just going to do sudo nano /ssh/config. This is the SSH config. This is a pretty important part. We are going to enable public key authentication so that we can use our SSH kind of key pair, which is mostly more secure. We'll enable this, and then we will allow public key authentication. We'll permit root login. No, we'll just do no. Since permitting root login is a pretty dangerous privilege. And then we will, password authentication is fine to have enabled, but we'll disable it real quick. And we should restart SSH and SSHD. We should also do an update of app just to check that it finished updating everything. It looks like it did. We'll upgrade if there's anything. Yes. I will just quickly upgrade. Alrighty, we're going to restart, I guess, these 3 things. Tab, okay. That should have worked. Now we should be able to connect with our key. Wait, actually, no. We need to do one more thing. We need to go to our SSH folder. We need to generate our keys, if you haven't already, using SSH key gen. Enter. You can add arguments to configure the size, and then it'll generate your key. Then you'll get 2 files. Sorry about that. IDRSA and IDRSA.pub. The .pub is your public key. You want that, so we are going to take my public key, and I am going to copy it to my clipboard. And I am simply going to go to my SSH folder, go to my authorized keys folder, and I'm going to simply paste it in. Right? We're just double checking. And that's good. So now we should be able to restart SSH and everything. And SSHD. And now we should be able to connect with our key. See? And that is how you do it. So, and also, I forgot to mention, we can just click exit and just run in background. And we've got our server running in the background completely. And you can do pretty much whatever you want, since this is an Ubuntu Server VM. Now that is all that covers, that is for today, everyone. I'll show you how to do some more things in Ubuntu Server 22.04. Let me know if you want to make it a series where we do things in Ubuntu Server 22.04, maybe installing software. See you, ladies and gentlemen, next time.